Anybody recognize that voice at all? You recognize the song. So if anybody watches Liverpool football, anybody watch Liverpool? Man, nobody watches football. So Liverpool actually uses that as their anthem. So they are a football club, meaning in American terms, that's soccer. And they play in England, and they play this song before in every home audience. So it's kind of interesting, but here's the background on it. It actually was a song originally done in 1945. It was a show tune in the musical Carousel by Rodgers and Hammerstein, right? And so they did this song a part of the musical, and then again in 1963, somebody covered it. They were called Gary and the Pacemakers. Now you're like, why are they called pacemakers? I don't know. They wanted to get hearts started again. And so Gary put together this version of You'll Never Walk Alone, and it became the most popular version of this song that has ever been produced and ever has still of this version. Now, a lot of people have tried to cover it. A lot of people have tried to be able to do this song, but somehow people always go back to Gary and the Pacemakers in order to really try to play this song and give it its due. And as I mentioned to you, Liverpool football, they as their anthem, but also if you looked up Liverpool's coat of arms, it's kind of their little logo emblem kind of thing. It says, "You'll never walk alone," right on the top of it. So not only did they adopt it as their anthem, as their song, to be able to get people together and all on the same page as the unit of people who are sports fans of Liverpool, but they also put it on their emblem. Because some reason, there's something that's happening here in this song that people are like, wait, this means something. Even by the title itself, you can already start to see You'll Never Walk Alone brings a connotation to us as followers of Jesus to be able to say, oh, Jesus has told us that. We know that God has already spoken these promises over us and that we're never going to walk alone. And so here's the good thing. This is what we'll get into. Here's the song begins in darkness. So he says, when you walk through a storm, hold your head up high. You see, it's about courage, dignity, and hope during suffering. You see, there's something that even when Liverpool decided to make that their anthem, it means that there was something in that city that people were overcoming. And they said, what is going to bring an anthem of hope, an anthem of dignity, an anthem of some kind of like this we're together in this. And you see, when they heard that song, they said, that's it. We're coming together even in the midst of suffering. So that's the kind of the general concept of this song, what it teaches us as a people to have courage and dignity and hope even in the midst of our own suffering. But let's dig into it. What can we learn? Storms will come, but they don't get the final word. Right? It's very much the same when we've talked actually in our first song, 7, with Prince, is that there was something with that as well, even though that was apocalyptic language in a different context. But they were talking about evil, and evil exists, but guess what? It doesn't have the last word. Here, storms, suffering, hardship is going to exist, but guess what? It doesn't have the final word, ever. So when you're going through something, you're going to say, this will not be the final word. When you have something difficult that you're facing, you're saying, but this is still not going to have the final word. We're going to see something greater. We're going to see a defeat of the things that we don't want to see. So we talked about Psalm 23. Everybody knows Psalm 23. Even those people who who rarely go to church, because what happens with Psalm 23 is spoken of at funerals. And so everybody has gone to a funeral? Yeah? Has everybody at a funeral heard Psalm 23? You see, that's the thing. And it's so funny, because I put it in this context, because Psalm 23 at a funeral, you're like, so we're talking about death. And Psalm 23 is not a psalm of death. Like, there's all kinds of things that you can do and pull from the scriptures to be able to say, we're going to talk about death here. Psalm 23 is not about death. It's about hope in the midst of darkness. And look, this passage, we're going to just get to Psalm 23, verse 4. I got to get there real quick. For some reason I was in the New Testament. Now I'm going to go to the Old Testament. Psalm 23, verse 4. If you got your Bibles, feel free to open it up. This is a psalm of David as it was read. And in verse 4 it says, even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close by me. Do you see, it doesn't say, and even when I'm dead, you're going to walk beside me, right? It doesn't say, but it's talking about those darkness. And somehow we've always said, when do we need the greatest hope? We need the greatest hope when we're looking at someone who has passed away, a loved one, a friend, a family member, and we're looking at this and you're saying, we need hope. We need to know that even in the darkness, that there's some kind of hope. And that's what David is trying to be able to declare for us, to be able to show us in the midst of this. He's saying, even when we're walking through difficult times, even when there's darkness that surrounds us, I will not be afraid. Why? Why do we not be afraid? Because you're close beside me. You see, we have a God who is near, not a God who is distant, not a God who's foreign, right? Not a God who is absent completely from our lives, just maybe staring at us from some cloud in the universe. No. It says that when we're walking through storms, and we will walk through storms. If you haven't been through a storm, you're waiting for a storm. And so when we see that the storm is rolling and we're looking at this and we're saying, I'm in the midst of this storm, what's going to happen? Well, what I do know is from Psalm 23, verse 4, that even in these darkness, these dark moments, I know that I'm not alone. So what are storms? Storms are a part of life. It's loss, it's grief, it's anxiety, it's injustice. These moments when we feel like we can't get a win. These moments when we're like, is this ever going to stop? You see, you look at those moments of loss and grief and anxiety and injustice, and we keep staring at it in the face, and we're like, oh, this one may eventually go away, but then all of a sudden another one rolls through just like storms. And this one rolls in, and we're looking at it in the face once again, and we're saying, what's it going to bring this time? And we stare at it in the face, and we feel like sometimes the darkness is going to envelop us. And yet, God says the darkness will never overcome. God doesn't abandon us in the midst of the darkness. God doesn't say, well, I'm light, and so therefore light and darkness, they're always going to be separated. I'm never going to step into the darkness. God's not going to say, oh, I'm afraid of the darkness. We know that God is bigger than that. And somehow we think that in those dark moments that we're completely alone. Can you imagine trying to be able to navigate life in the darkness without anybody near us? That's hard. Can you imagine going through and experiencing loss or grief or anxiety or injustice and saying, I'm all on my own? You know, for us, it is hard to believe, and yet there are millions of people who try to be able to do things on their own. They try to be able to suffer alone, to grieve alone. But God tells us we were never meant to walk alone. God says, you and me, we were built, we were formed, we were put together, right? God put something in us that says you're not to be alone. You're not to be a people who are alone. You are not to be followers of Jesus alone. You weren't meant for that. And we look at two different dynamics. We look at what God is, yes, promising in multiple places throughout the scriptures that you are not walking alone, that God is with you. But also, don't neglect one another being around you. Because we can look at it this way and say, well, of course, God's always with me, but somehow I'm doing this on my own still. And we're like, but why are you trying to do it alone? Why are you trying to be able to walk this road alone? Why are you trying to walk this path alone? We were never meant to walk alone. Here's a couple of passages for us. Isaiah 43. We got two right in a row. Isaiah 43. And this is 1 and 2. But now, O Jacob, listen to the Lord who created you. O Israel, the one who formed you, says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you go through the deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. So do you remember times and instances when the flames did not consume? We look at the Old Testament. There's two different places. Quiz time, anybody. Two different places where something is on fire that is not consumed. Go. Daniel. What happened to Daniel? Well, it wasn't actual Daniel, but it was in the book of Daniel. If you, yeah, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Right. Fiery furnace. Yeah. Right. And there was something like a fourth guy, which is why we also sang that song to open up, another in the fire, right? So you recognize that you saw it. There's one, check. Good job, Jim. We got a second one. We got a burning bush. What happened to the burning bush? It was there, it was on fire, but it says it was not being consumed. And it was there from that burning bush that God speaks to who? Moses. Good job, everybody. Good job. Give yourselves a hand here. We got it. Woo! Two places. Things are on fire but are not being consumed. And guess what? The prophet Isaiah goes back and he says, just like those things, those oppression, those hardships, it's going to feel like you're on fire, but you're never going to be consumed. The song has a line. It says, walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain. Right? And this is that passage. We'll go back to the real quick Matthew. We don't want to leave Matthew out because everybody knows this passage as well, but Matthew 28:20. It says, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. Right, so there's a moment that we get in these two passages, Isaiah New Testament with Jesus when he's saying, we're going to walk on through the wind, we're going to walk on through the rain. And you see, those things are not going to consume us. The things are never going to overtake us. And so sometimes, even in those moments that we feel like we're being consumed, when we feel like we're being depleted, when we feel like we're being burned up, we can go back to what God has already said. That we're not alone through this, and guess what? These things will never defeat us. So God's presence is constant, even when God seems silent. And a lot of times we can say, God seems silent. We feel like God is always speaking in the big moments, especially when things are going well, right? When things are like rolling and everything's kind of picking up steam, we're like, of course, God's here in the midst of all of this goodness. Everything's good. And so God, of course, is always present in the good. God is the one who gives us all good things. And so when we're looking at this, we're saying, of course, God's here in the good moments. God is here in the moments of celebration. God's here in the moments that we get to be able to be together and be able to just celebrate. But we're also looking on the other side and we're like, but things are going wrong. Things are happening that shouldn't happen. When sickness is trying to overcome life. When injustice is trying to be able to rear its ugly head once again upon whatever person, people that is happening to. What we see is in those moments of that's hardship, we're saying, God can't be present there because this is bad. This is not good. This is not meant to be. So we feel like God's in the good and God's absent or silent in the storm. And so I take you back to, real quick, we see Jesus in the storm, right? Jesus in the boat with his disciples. He's in the midst of the storm. The disciples are freaking out because they're like, something's happening. The wind and the waves, they're toppling over the boat. I feel like we're going to capsize. We're going to be flipped over, and we're going to die here in the Sea of Galilee. Many people did die in the Sea of Galilee that same way, which is the reason why they had some experience with this. They knew of people who died in the Sea of Galilee the same way. And yet, where's Jesus? Depends on your translation, but he's either in the back of the boat or he's in the underbelly of the boat. And what is Jesus doing? He's sleeping. You see, for the disciples, they're saying, I'm in the midst of the storm, and yet Jesus is sleeping. So in that same way, we're like with those disciples sitting in the storm and we're wondering, is this the moment that's going to overtake me? Is this the moment that I am going to perish? Because that's all we can see. That's all we can think about, is the thing that's trying to overtake us. So what do? They run to Jesus. They shake him awake. They're like, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? And isn't that what we do with God sometimes? We go back to God, we yell and we scream, and we're like, God, if I could shake you right now, I would be shaking you because I want to be able to hear what you have to say about this. This doesn't make sense. What are you doing? Don't you care? And yet Jesus says, why did you lack faith? And he speaks to the wind and the waves and he says, be still. Everything calms. You see, and we wonder about this because we're like, so is it just these moments that all of a sudden we're like, hey, I've got to be able to shake God in order for God to be present? No. Jesus wants to teach his disciples an important lesson about the storms. He's saying, I want you to realize the next storm that you're in, even if I'm not in the boat with you, is that I'm always present with you. That you don't have to fear the wind and the waves, that you don't have to fear the storm, even when you feel like I'm silent. Because this is the good news for us. I mean, the gospel itself, the incarnation of Jesus, Jesus becoming flesh, God in the flesh, this is Jesus entering the storm with us. Jesus is saying, this life that you're living, you don't have to live this alone. Why? Because I've also lived it. Jesus' humanity, Jesus lived these things. It says in Hebrews that he has been tempted in every way that you and I have been tempted, and yet was sinless. Jesus stepping into the storm is showing God's humanity with us. God with us is a wonderful part of the Gospels that says we know that it's not just a God who is absent, but it's a God who is present. But today, God also gives us community. And this is something that we cannot put down, that we cannot think lightly just because we're also dealing with other human beings that are not perfect. Because this is what happens oftentimes in Christian communities and church communities, is that somebody along the way gets hurt, gets offended, gets whatever, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't need that community anymore. I don't need any of that church community. I don't need anybody. And you see, in that community, the community itself is supposed to be the representation of what God is in our midst. It's supposed to be full of love and full of making room for people's mistakes. God gives us these communities for that reason. He says, because you know that, yes, we've already covered this, God's walking with you. But God also says, hey, I've got these people. They're not going to be perfect, but guess what? They're going to walk with you too. And again in the New Testament, throughout the Gospels, throughout the letters, what do we see? We see Paul making these room. He's saying, hey, as far as it goes with you, be at peace with others. Hey, make sure you don't neglect meeting with one another. Why? Because this is God saying, I want you to be present with one another. I want you to know one another. I want you to say that, yes, this is the family of God, and not just say, oh, I'm only with you for an hour, one day a week. You see, that's not family. That's a reservation. That's I've got dinner scheduled for one day a week, and I'm going to make sure that I hit that reservation. You see, when he's talking about the family of God, he's saying we should be together. We should know one another. We should be able to lift up our joys and our sorrows and everything in between with one another. Because this is the good news of what happens in the midst of that Christian community that has that good balance, is that we're going to have these things happening all the time. We got people who are celebrating good things. We got birthdays. We've got anniversaries. We've got all these wonderful things to be able to celebrate. And at the same time, we've got people dealing with some hardships, some hurts. And it's the hope in the midst of that community that says, yes, the good is the things we're going to celebrate, and these things that are not things to celebrate, we're going to pray about it. We're going to talk through it. and there's going to be hope on the other side of it. Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, also a familiar passage because we used it just a few weeks ago. Romans 8:38, and I'm convinced that nothing can separate us from God's love, neither death nor life, angels nor demons, neither fears for today nor worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us. No power in the sky above or the earth below, indeed nothing in all of creation, will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that's revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. And this is the good thing in this song, because I think it has a great reflection of this. Because at the end of the song, it talks about this: at the end of the storm, there's a golden sky. Now, we're not talking about heaven being the gold-filled streets. Maybe that's the reference. But really what this means is it's an image of redemption. That even in the end of the storm ends, there's no more rain, and there's no more of these things that are going to get us into trouble, right? There's no more of these moments, right? And then all of a sudden we see the clearing. In the rain, we see a rainbow. And you see, these are images of redemption, that there is something that happens at the end. And we can look to the skies and be able to see that there's something beyond it. Christian hope isn't naive. It's rooted in the resurrection. Right? So when we look at this and we think that most, even as Paul says, a lot of people, as he was writing in Romans, he's like, some people are looking at this cross and this Jesus, and they're looking at Jesus and they're saying, oh, well, it's really nice. It's a nice image. Right? It's good for you to be able to think that somebody, died and rose again for you, but that's not possible. That can't be done. And Paul says what it is that people look at us and say, you're foolish. And Paul says that's our power. To be able to look through the storms of life and to be able to see that there's something on the other side. To look through the pain, to look through the suffering, to look through the grieving and say, there's hope on the other side. Future. The future goes beyond pain. It goes beyond the tears. It goes beyond the worry and the anxiety. There's something on the other side. There's hope. So to the grieving, the anxious, the weary, the lonely, you're never walking alone. God's with you. And here's the good news, we're all with you too. So we keep walking, for the light is always present. In Jesus' name. Please stand and pray with me.